Montana Territory, 1883. The wind howled low across the dry flats west of Miles City, and the sky was the color of steel. Parker Prescott shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing ahead as his horse crested the ridge. He had not planned to be out this far, not with dusk creeping in and snow threatening early. But the tracks he followed, boot prints, fresh and hurried, had veered off the main trail and pulled him with them. A pale flicker caught his eye through the trees below. Candlelight. He dismounted quietly, tying his horse to a low branch. The cabin was small, half hidden by pine and brush, smoke curling from the chimney. He stepped closer, boots muffled by early snow. Through the cracked window, he saw her. She sat alone near the hearth, a book open in her lap, one hand resting on its page like she needed the weight to hold herself still. A candle burned beside her. She was not crying, but her shoulders were drawn tight, her face pale and serious in the glow. Most folks did not read out here, not unless they came from somewhere else. And no one stayed alone this far out unless they had to. He knocked once, firm and clear. The woman startled, then stood quickly, book clutched tight. She opened the door slowly, eyes wary. "I do not mean trouble," Parker said. "Just saw your light. Thought maybe you were lost." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I am not lost. I live here. Alone. I am not helpless," she said. He held up both hands. "I never said you were." They stared at each other a moment. She had dark hair pinned back in a twist, curls loosed around her cheeks. Her dress was plain but clean. She looked like someone who had not had a real conversation in a long while. "I am Parker Prescott," he said. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Nella Langford. You can come in, just for a bit." The heat inside hit him slow, wrapping around his shoulders. The place was neat, everything in its place, but it held that quiet weight of a house that had known sorrow. Nella poured a cup of coffee from the kettle, handed it to him. "You are far from town." "I was tracking a stray calf," he said, then added, "Never found it." She nodded. "I have not seen a cow in weeks." He looked at the book she had set down. "You like to read?" "It helps," she said simply. He did not ask what it helped with. He did not have to. He knew that kind of ache. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. 2 years. That surprised him. "By yourself?" Her jaw tightened. "I had children, once. 2 boys. Malcolm was 6. Miles was 4. Parker's chest pulled tight. "What happened?" "My husband left. Said he was going to Helena to find steady work. That was more than 2 years ago. I waited. I wrote letters. I never heard back. The boys took sick that winter." She said it flat, like a story she had told herself too many times to cry over anymore. Parker said nothing for a long moment. Just sat with it. "They are buried out back," she added softly, like it mattered he knew. He looked down at his cup. "I am sorry." Nella's voice shook a little. "I get by. I sew for the general store in town. And I read." A log cracked in the fire. She stepped back to her chair, sat again, pulled her book into her lap. He watched her fingers brush the edge of the page, gentle and slow. "I should go," Parker said after a while, setting his cup down. "You can stay until the storm passes," she said without looking up. "There is stew left, and I doubt your horse would thank you for dragging him through snow in the dark." He glanced through the window. Snow had started to fall, soft and steady. "I appreciate it," he said. She nodded, but said nothing else. She turned a page, and he watched her eyes settle into the words like they were a place she knew well. That night, he bedded down on a cot near the kitchen, listening to the wind push against the walls. Somewhere deeper in the cabin, Nella turned a page. The snow came heavy through the night and stayed 3 days. Parker helped mend the chicken coop, chopped wood, and fixed the back door hinge that had been hanging loose. They talked more over those days, nothing deep, just enough to know each other's rhythms. He learned she liked apples, but never ate the last one in the crate. He found out she had grown up in Illinois and missed thunderstorms. She learned he had a sister back east, but had not spoken to her in years. That he had never married. That he had once broken his leg trying to break a green horse, and now walked with a slight limp when it rained. On the 3rd night, he found her reading again by candlelight, the wind quieter now, the snow easing. "You read a lot," he said, stepping into the room with a blanket in his hands. "I like stories that end well," Nella said, her voice softer than usual. He looked at her a long moment. "What about real life?" She closed the book, eyes lifting to his. "I used to think happy endings were for other people." Parker moved forward, heart beating steady. And now, she stood, fingers still curled around the edge of her book. "You are the ending I was hoping for," she said. He reached for her then, hands brushing her waist. She did not flinch. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not hurried. It was careful, like two people who knew how much it cost to trust. He pulled her close, arms wrapping around her as if he could shield her from everything that had ever hurt. "I do not want to leave this place if you are in it," he whispered against her hair. "Then stay," she said. And he did. By the time the snow melted down to wet dirt and glistening pine needles, Parker had built a lean-to for the chickens, res-tacked the kindling pile twice, and carved Nella a wooden spoon when the old one cracked across the handle. He hadn't meant to stay past the storm. But every morning came with her voice offering coffee, and every evening closed with her sitting near the fire, eyes following a line of words like they were leading her somewhere she still hoped to go. They never spoke of what came next, not aloud. But come morning, Parker harnessed her mule to the sled and rode into town, saying only, "There's things I need to gather." She didn't ask which things. He was gone 3 days. Nella kept to her chores. She patched a tear in the curtain, boiled the last of the dried beans, and walked to the far fence line with a tin of nails and a hammer wrapped in cloth. On the second day, she noticed the wagon ruts down by the frozen creek had filled with meltwater. The trail would be passable soon. The world was shifting underfoot again. Late on the third day, she heard hooves. Not hurried, but steady. She stepped out, apron still tied at her waist, snow crusting the hem of her skirt. Parker came into view leading the mule, a crate lashed behind the saddle, and something wrapped in oilcloth poking out the top. His coat was dusted pale from the road, cheeks red from cold. He looked at the house like he was making sure it hadn't vanished while he was gone. Nella folded her arms. "You rode out with nothing but a saddlebag. What did you need 3 days for?" He swung down, untied the crate, and carried it up the steps. "You'll see." She watched him set it inside by the hearth, then kneel to unfasten the lid. Inside were shelves fitted, nailed down snug, and stacked with books, some worn, some near new. Her breath caught. "You bought out Mr. Laramie's shelves," she said quietly. "Not all of them," he replied. "Just the ones that reminded me of you." She ran her fingers along the spines. Some she knew, others she didn't. There was one with a marbled green cover, still smelling of ink and glue. She picked it up, opened the first page, and read the title aloud. "It's about a woman who teaches herself to chart stars," Parker said. "Thought you might like that." She sat on the floor beside the crate and did not speak for a long while. He sat, too, back against the wall, boots stretched toward the fire. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know. You don't even read." "I'm learning." She looked at him then, properly. The flicker of firelight caught the pale scar beneath his left eye, the one he hadn't explained and she hadn't asked about. His hands were rough and still carried the smell of pine tar. Her chest tightened. "I used to think if I let someone in again, I'd lose the rest of myself," she said. He put his hand over hers, gently. "You never lost anything that was yours to begin with." She let the book rest in her lap and leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. The fire burned low. Outside, the last of the snow turned to water and slipped from the eaves in soft, steady drops. Later, over supper, he wiped his mouth on the back of his hand and said, "I was thinking. There's a plot of land south of here, past where the cottonwoods start. Used to belong to a man named Henry Dobbins. He passed last spring. No kin that I know of." She tilted her head. "You want to farm it?" "No," he said. "I want to build a proper house. One with space enough for 2 people and a library shelf that doesn't sit in a crate." She stared at him, the spoon in her hand forgotten. "I could put in a floor before the ground freezes again. If you wanted." Nella set her spoon down. "I don't need a bigger house." Parker met her eyes. "I know, but maybe you deserve one." She reached across the table, took his hand in both of hers, and held it there. "You could build it," she said. "But not just for me." He nodded once, voice rough. "For us." That night, they didn't sit apart. The cot stayed empty. The wind had gone still, and the world outside their door was quiet. Nella curled beside him, one hand resting on his chest, and for the first time in years, she slept without waking. By early April, the thaw had worked its way into the earth, and the ground gave underfoot with a soft, reluctant squelch. Parker cleared brush from the southern edge of the property, where the cottonwoods grew tall and lean with early buds. He worked with measured pace, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the handle of the axe worn smooth from years of calloused hands. Nella came out mid-morning with a tin cup of water, her skirts lifted just enough to keep clear of the mud. "I thought you'd wait till the frost was out of the ground," she said, handing it over. He drank deep, wiped his mouth with his wrist. "I can't. If I wait, the sawmill will be overrun. I want the boards cut before planting season." Nella glanced out over the patch of land he'd marked with stakes and string. There wasn't much to see yet, just boundary lines and an idea, but it settled in her chest like a promise. "I put a letter in the post when I went into town," he added. "To my sister in Pennsylvania. Told her I've been wrong not writing sooner. Told her about you." Nella's eyes didn't waver. "What for? She should know I found something real out here." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded once and turned back toward the cabin. Inside, she laid out her sewing on the table, but her hands didn't move. Her gaze stayed out the window, where Parker's figure passed between beams of sunlight and pale shadow, steady and sure. That evening, while the stew simmered low and the sky turned honey-colored at the edges, she unwrapped a bundle of cloth from the drawer beneath the bread box. Inside was a faded linen dress, child-sized, with a row of scalloped stitches along the hem. She carried it out to the porch where he sat sharpening his draw knife, and placed it in his lap. "I made this for Miles the winter before he passed," she said, voice even. "He never wore it. He never got big enough." Parker set the blade down, hands stilling. He looked at the dress without touching it. "I didn't keep much," she said, "but I held on to this." He reached for her hand. "You want to bury it? I'll go with you." She shook her head. "No, I want to make something new from it. Something for what's coming." His brow furrowed as he looked up at her. "What do you mean?" She folded the cloth again, slower this time. "I haven't bled in 6 weeks." He didn't say anything at first. Just reached out and took the bundle from her hands like it was something fragile and worth protecting. After a long moment, he stood and pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll build that house stronger than I planned," he said. "You already did," she whispered. They didn't speak of it more that night. They didn't have to. The next morning, she set about letting out the seams of her dresses. He went into town with a list of lumber and a new urgency in his step. At the sawmill, Parker argued down the price of cedar for the roof braces, his voice steady but firm. He rode back with the wagon bed piled high and tied down in neat rows. When he reached the cabin, Nella wasn't outside. He found her inside the root cellar, inspecting the last of the winter carrots and tapping the sides of the crocks to test for spoilage. "These'll keep a few more weeks," she said, brushing dust from her skirt. "We'll need more come fall." "I'll plant twice the rows," he said. She stood, stretching her back, and he saw the faint crease of fatigue near her eyes. He stepped forward and offered his arm. She took it without hesitation. By May, the skeleton of the new house stood tall against the slope. Parker worked from dawn until the shadows lengthened, hands blistered and shoulders sore, but he never once asked for rest. Nella brought him meals wrapped in cloth and sat beside him while he measured and leveled. Sometimes she read aloud while he hammered, her voice carrying across the beams and open air. One afternoon, as he hoisted the last beam into place, Nella stepped out from the cabin holding a folded quilt. "I started piecing this when I first arrived," she called up to him. "Didn't know what I was making it for." He climbed down, wiping his brow. "What's it look like?" She unfolded it, revealing a pattern of stars stitched in deep blues and rust reds. "Looks like something that belongs in a home." He ran his hand over the fabric gently, then looked at her. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "I still carry the ache," she answered. "But it doesn't carry me." He took the quilt from her hands and wrapped it around her shoulders, then drew her close. "Come fall," he said, "we'll sit under this roof with a fire going and a child in our arms." She leaned into him, eyes closed, and whispered, "And I'll still be reading by candlelight." He smiled against her hair. "I'll be right there beside you." They stood like that until the wind shifted warm across the field, and the world settled into a hush that sounded like peace. June came in warm and dry, the kind of weather that rattled loose boards and brought out the scent of pine sap. The new house stood with its frame fully raised, rafters set, and the floorboards fastened tight. Parker had traded 2 sacks of dried apples and a repaired saddle for a second-hand cook stove, which now sat under canvas at the edge of the foundation, waiting for walls. Nella spent her mornings stitching curtains from bolts of muslin she'd kept for years, her needle moving with quiet purpose. She no longer measured time in months or seasons, but in the feel of Parker's footsteps on the porch and the way her belly now curved gently beneath her apron. One afternoon, she found him kneeling beside the root cellar, fitting hinges to a new door he'd shaped from pine boards and iron straps. "That's fine enough work," she said, brushing sawdust from the hem of her dress. "I figured if we're putting food by come harvest, it ought to have a door that holds against wind." She crouched beside him, resting her hand on her knee. "You always looking ahead like that?" He turned the hinge slowly in his palm. "When I was younger, I didn't stay anywhere long enough to think past the next sunrise. Now I find my mind wandering to things I never used, to what kind of trees to plant, whether a boy or girl will like to help me mend saddles, how a porch ought to face west just so we can sit and watch the sun fall behind the butte." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "I've been wondering, too, about names. What you got in mind?" "There's a name from my mother's family. Clara, if it's a girl. Or Elias, for a boy." He nodded once. "Strong names." They stayed there a while, crouched in the dirt, the scent of cut wood and warm earth around them. In the distance, a hawk circled, casting a long shadow that passed over the clearing without sound. That night, they boiled turnips and chopped fresh chives from the garden bed she'd started behind the cabin. While the pot simmered, Parker pulled a bundle from beneath the cot and laid it on the table. "I brought this back from the trading post last week," he said, unwrapping the cloth. Inside was a small wooden box with a hinged lid and a brass clasp. She opened it carefully. Inside were glass bottles of ink, a tin of nibs, and a leather-bound ledger with marbled end papers. "I thought you could keep your thoughts in it," he said. "Or stories. Or whatever comes." She traced a fingertip along the spine. "I haven't written anything since the boys passed." "I know," he said, "but I thought maybe now you might want to start again." She looked down at the blank page, then back at him. "Only if you promise to read what I write when the time comes." "I will," he said, "even if it takes me all day to sound it out." Later, after the fire had burned low, she sat at the table long after he'd gone to bed. She didn't write yet. Just opened the ledger and ran her hand across the first page, its emptiness no longer hollow, but waiting. By midsummer, the windows were in and the roof shingled. Parker fashioned a cradle from spare cedar trimmed with scraps of blue calico Nella had once used for quilt patches. He set it near the hearth where the warmth would hold through winter. One evening, he returned from checking the fence line to find her standing just outside the cabin, one hand resting on the small of her back. She was watching the house, her gaze steady. "I didn't think I'd ever have another home," she said when he came up beside her. "Not one made with me in mind." He took her hand gently. "It was always meant for you. I just didn't know it yet." She leaned against him, her head fitting beneath his chin like it had always belonged there. The smell of sun-warmed grass rose from the fields, and the cottonwoods whispered above them. They stood like that until the stars came out, and the house behind them glowed faintly with the light of a single candle in the window. The wheatgrass behind the new house had turned golden by late August, brushing high against the split-rail fencing Parker had set in place just 2 weeks earlier. The porch boards still smelled of fresh pitch, and the windows, each fitted by hand, let in the full length of the morning light. Nella stood barefoot in the kitchen, pressing the heel of her palm into a round of dough. Her belly had grown heavier, her steps slower, but her hands moved with practiced ease. The child shifted low inside her, a quiet turning that no longer startled her as it once had. Parker ducked through the door, wiping his neck with a damp kerchief. His collar was unbuttoned and his cheeks sun-flushed from the final cutting of Timothy hay. "She's built solid," he said, setting the scythe against the wall. "I think we'll get 2 more stacks before the frost." Nella set the dough aside to rise and turned, resting one hand on the table's edge. "I want to hang the baby's blanket near the hearth. There's a nail above the cradle." He nodded, walking over to the sideboard where the folded bundle lay. "You finished it?" "I did." He unfolded it carefully. The stitching was tight, the corners squared. A simple patchwork of faded blue and soft ivory, with a single pine tree sewn into the center. I stitched it from your work shirt and one of Clara's old dresses, she said. The one I brought west in my trunk, but never wore. Parker turned it once in his hands before hanging it over the nail. It settled into place as if it had always belonged there. He came to her side then, resting one hand just above her hip, where she leaned slightly for balance. I want to ask you something. She looked up at him, eyes catching the sun where it sifted through the glass. Go on. He cleared his throat, not out of nerves but caution. I've known what I wanted since that second snow melted off your roof. But I waited. You'd had enough taken from you, and I didn't want to be another thing to carry. But now I see you not just mending, but blooming, and it feels right to say it. She didn't speak, only watched him close. I want to marry you, Nella Langford. I want it done proper, with my name and yours written down side by side in the ledger at the courthouse. I want our child to know we chose this. Chose each other. She reached for his hand, fingers curling into his. I'll marry you, Parker Prescott. Because I see the way you build not just houses, but a life worth stepping into. And I want to be part of it, every morning it gives us. They stood for a long time in the quiet of their kitchen, hands clasped, the scent of baking bread rising slow and warm around them. They were married a week later, under the cottonwoods where the land sloped gently toward the creek. The justice from town came out in a borrowed wagon, bringing a tin box with ink and seal. Nella wore a pale green dress she had made years before, but never had reason to finish until now. Parker wore his cleanest shirt, the collar pressed flat, and combed his hair with water from the creek. They spoke their vows with clear voices, the breeze lifting the branches above them. Afterward, they sat on the new porch, sharing slices of blackberry pie Nella had baked that morning before sunrise. There were no guests but the birds and the hush of late summer wind, and it was more than enough. When her labor came, it was just past the harvest moon. The pains started low and steady, and she lit the lantern herself, breathing through each wave with calm resolve. Parker stayed close, fetching water, folding cloths, and keeping the fire steady as she leaned against him, her grip strong, her gaze unblinking. The child came before dawn, a girl, small but full of voice, her cry high and clear as the first light broke across the floorboards. Parker wrapped her in the pine tree quilt and laid her in Nella's arms, kneeling beside the bed with awe stitched into every line of his face. Nella traced the child's brow with a trembling finger. Clara, she whispered. He nodded. She's got your eyes. In the weeks that followed, the house filled with the sounds of a new life's soft coos, the creak of the cradle, the rhythmic hush of Nella's lullabies. Parker worked shorter days, never straying more than a field's length from the porch. He installed a rain barrel at the back corner and built a rocker from leftover oak slats, sanding it smooth so it wouldn't catch on her skirts. One morning, Nella sat with Clara nestled at her breast, the rocker swaying slow, when Parker came in holding a folded paper. It's from my sister, he said. She wants to come west before the snows. Says she'd like to meet the both of you. Nella looked up. You're ready for that? I am, he said. We've got room here now, and I want her to see how far we've come. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Then we'll welcome her. As autumn deepened, they harvested the last of the squash and stacked firewood high against the north wall. At night, they lay together beneath the patchwork quilt, Clara sleeping soundly in her cradle nearby. Parker would sometimes wake and reach out, just to make sure she was still beside him. And Nella, who once feared the quiet would swallow her whole, now found comfort in the soft rhythm of his breath and the weight of his arm across her waist. The house stood firm through the first snow, its windows aglow with candlelight, the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke curling through the rafters. And when spring came again, it would find them there still together, still building, with a daughter growing strong under their roof and a life full of steady, earned joy.